From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm Eric Cressey, and today I'm excited to have Christian Wonders, the Cressey Sports Performance Massachusetts pitching coordinator, on the line. We're going to handle this one a little bit differently than we have the previous podcast. Instead of it being just an interview with a player or a sports science person or a coach or something along those lines, we're actually going to make this a little bit more of a, CSP staff discussion. So it's going to be some pretty exciting stuff, and I think you'll really, really enjoy it as we work our way through here. So Christian and I are going to go back and forth as we attack this, and hopefully give you a really comprehensive look at all the things you need to consider when it comes to understanding curveballs and sliders with respect to young athletes. Before we get to it, though, I want to remind you that this episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. It's an all-in-one superfood supplement with 75 whole food sourced ingredients to support your body's nutritional needs across 5 critical areas: energy, immunity, gut health, hormonal support, and healthy aging. If you head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey, you can claim a special offer. It's 20 free travel packets valued at $79 with your first purchase. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, Cressey. It's a great introductory offer. This stuff is really good. I use it myself. My wife uses it. It's dairy free, includes prebiotics, probiotics. Effectively, it's nutritional insurance that we use with a lot of our athletes, whether they're college or pro players who may be on the road and not getting enough fruits and vegetables in. So highly recommend it for anybody out there. Today's guest is the Cressey Sports Performance Massachusetts pitching coordinator. He was a pitcher at Georgia College and State University and completed a bachelor's in exercise science. He went on to intern at Cressey Sports Performance before we brought him on staff as our pitching coordinator. He's the owner of Elite Pitching Development. He's the pitching coach for the Yarmouth Dennis Red Sox on the Cape Cod Baseball League, and actually serves as a consultant for Georgia Tech Baseball's coaching staff throughout this season. He also is a close family friend. He was the guy I called when our twins were born and we needed somebody to take care of our dog. So that should speak volumes about how much we think of Christian Wonders. Welcome to the show, bud.
Thanks for having me, my man.
This is going to be a lot of fun. So we're gonna get to some really, really good stuff here. And honestly, this is going to be 90% Christian's expertise that I get to see on a daily basis, with the athletes that he works with. But the other thing that I think is awesome about this is Christian, you're a big brother. How old's your little brother?
He just turned 10.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I get to experience this from a firsthand, especially being up here in Massachusetts. I'm talking with my dad a lot. My dad coaches my little brother's team, so and then whenever I'm at home, I get to go out and coach him. So he's kind of like my little side project whenever I'm at home.
I love it, man. I say he's your guinea pig, but I know he's a stud already. So
yeah,
he swings it lefty and catches too, doesn't he?
Yep, for sure.
Love it. All right, so we got to start brewing. If any of the college coaches on this call want to start recruiting, we'll get the ball rolling. All right, so this is a big discussion that we got to hit on, and it's a hard place for young coaches and and parents to be with respect to understanding when to integrate a breaking ball, with their athletes. And you see some kids. We actually just posted a podcast with Adam Ottavino from the Yankees, who's got some of the best feel for spinning the ball in professional baseball. And Adam talked a lot about how he spun it really, really regularly at a young age. Conversely, we have a guy, Tyler Beatty, who's a highly ranking prospect for the San Francisco Giants. And if you look back at Tyler really didn't have a true curveball until probably his senior year in high school. And he was a first-round draft pick and went to Vanderbilt, won a national championship. So there's different ways to attack this. But I think what I want to do today is I want to introduce where some of the the hesitancy came from, and kind of where it's led us to today. So if you look back in the research, there was actually a good study that came out all the way back in 2002. Okay, and it was basically a study that was, the lead author was Stephen Lyman, but also on that were Glenn Fleissig, James Andrews, so the crew at the American Sports Medicine Institute, in Alabama, and they looked at 476 young pitchers, so ages 9 to 14, and they followed them for one season. So they basically did a bunch of questionnaires. If you actually get a chance, I'd encourage you to read the study. It's called Effective Pitch Type, Pitch Count, and Pitching Mechanics on Risk of Elbow and Shoulder Pain in Youth Baseball Pitchers. So what they basically did was they did these crazy amount of questionnaires with young pitchers. They did a little bit of preseason video analysis of pitching mechanics, but they actually had these kids calling in and doing interviews automated after every game. And what they did was they tracked all these little guys over the course, of a full baseball season to see what really correlated with injuries. So not surprisingly, there's a huge association between the number of pitches thrown in a game and during the season and the rate of elbow pain and shoulder pain. That's not surprising. We know overuse is the single biggest risk factor for injuries, particularly in young athletes, but certainly working further up the ranks. What was interesting about that study, though, is it also showed that the curveball was associated with a 52% increased risk of shoulder pain, and the slider was associated with an 86% increased risk of elbow pain. So certainly, some of these concerns that are out there, societally are very, valid. And all that stuff is happening concurrently with a lot of orthos who are seeing the crazy surge in Tommy John surgeries that we saw in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Those numbers went sky high, not just at the professional level, but also, down into youth ranks where it was even more pronounced. What was interesting about that study, though, about a half of all the kids presented with issues, and 15% of all appearances resulted in some kind of pain. They also needed 147 coaches to participate in order to even collect their data. And as you go through it, there's some questionable stuff. There's only 14% of the kids threw a slider. The ratio of kids throwing sliders was way higher in the 13 to 14-year-old age group. And what that tells me is you saw a lot of kids who threw ugly curveballs for years who had to go and try to learn how to throw a slider as an alternative. But I think the biggest concern about this Lyman study is nothing that they did wrong with the study methods. They worked with what they had at the time, but we've had just this amazing increase in the amount of data collection methods and technology since that 2002 time slot. Right now we have MODIS sleeves where we can measure valgus stress on an elbow in real time. And we're getting some interesting numbers on that where we're realizing, hey, a lot of guys have higher elbow stress throwing in flat ground than they do off the mound. We have high-level biomechanics laboratories, not just in like these, incredibly well-funded clinical institutions. We're actually getting it much more, on the private side as well. We're seeing, folks using Rapsodo. We're getting all these different amenities like high-speed cameras to really help kids develop and for us to critically evaluate how players are doing. So what was interesting as a follow-up study to that initial Lyman study, so if you look at that study, that was 476 young pitchers back in 2002. And what actually happened was in 2010, with Glenn Fleissig and Andrews as the lead authors, they actually published a 10-year perspective study. So basically what happened was this crew, when they published in 2010, had followed 481 youth pitchers from ages 9 to 14 in a 10-year follow-up study. So we got a huge sample size. Instead of just that 1-year snapshot, we got 10 years to evaluate, is this stuff really clinically significant? And what's really interesting is there was a quote, it's actually in the New York Times from Glenn Fleissig after this article was published. Basically what it showed was there was zero predictive capability of breaking balls to predict arm injuries. That, as we looked back on it over this big sample size, we're realizing that, having a curveball or a slider didn't actually predict, injuries in young pitchers. And Glenn Fleissig's quote in the New York Times was, "Science is banging heads with intuition and gut instinct. For years, we told people that curveballs were bad. Then we set out to prove it. We did not prove curveballs are safe, but we could not prove they were dangerous." And Andrew's follow-up, he said, "What we found out in the lab is true. For pitchers with proper mechanics, the force of throwing a curveball is no greater than for a fastball. But that's not what happens in reality on the baseball field. Many kids don't have proper mechanics or enough neuromuscular control, or they're fatigued when throwing curveballs. things break down. So I think this is a really important consideration, is that you can go and you can hop on Twitter and follow Pitching Ninja's feed, and you can watch, last night Mike Soroka was ripping off amazing sliders and, and pitched super well in the outing he had last night. It was a very refined thing. But you also saw Mike Soroka get away with a couple of changeups that were right down the middle, right? So he made a mistake, but you see guys that effectively are seeing all those pitches coming out of the same tunnel, out of the same arm action, in a very consistent or, close to release point and extension on those pitches. So the slider, the curveball, there's going to be subtle deviations where, you'll have a little bit more on a extension on changeup and a fastball than you will on a breaking ball. But for all things, considered, they are pretty comparable. We don't see that in young athletes. You can tell a slider out of their hand, when their mechanics aren't where they need to be. So, what we're really speaking to is we're in this tricky dynamic. That study was published in 2010, and what was intriguing is, as the Andrews quote implied, that there are orthos that are not able to get behind the idea that, young athletes, are all completely safe throwing breaking balls. I know Dr. Kremchek, the Reds team doctor, also said some good quotes in that article where he said, this doesn't line up with what I'm seeing in the clinic when I'm doing surgery. So I think it's a really important discussion that we have to have here now, 9 years later, now that we have more technology at our fingertips. We have more resources available to coaches. And Christian, I really want to get your take on it. So let's start. What's your personal position statement on when to teach breaking balls? Is it an age thing? Is it a developmental milestone thing that a pitcher has to earn? How do you approach it?
I think it's kind of both. So if a kid is a little bit more developed, then I might start them a little bit earlier. Like if a kid can do a push-up and can move kind of decently at a younger age. But I do think that there is a point in time where you do have to start teaching pitchers how to spin a breaking ball. And I don't think it's inherently bad to start a kid that's 9, 10 years old on learning how to get to that like front of the baseball, that supinated position. Because at the end of the day, like it is a very learned movement, and I have kids that come in that are 15, 16 years old, and they've just never, ever been taught how to get into that position at ball release. And it's really, really hard at that point in their pitching careers to teach them to get to that position if they've never done it before, because they just don't have those repetitions. Now, in saying that, like teaching them to get to that position is totally different than having them throw breaking balls in games at that age. I'm just saying that teaching them to get to that position in catch, maybe from like 15 feet to start, and feeling the baseball come over their middle finger to where they're getting to the front, or where they're getting that good rotation of a breaking ball. That is where the starting point is. And then it's like, okay, let's do that a couple times a week, and then the progression is then into catch. And then as they get older, as they start to learn how to spin that ball where it's like an efficient breaking ball, then it's into flat grounds, and then maybe into games. But you just don't want to let them think that, okay, well, I'm learning how to throw this curveball now, I'm learning how to spin this curveball, and curveballs are extremely sexy, so I'm just going to start throwing curveballs in games because my opponent 10-year-old hitter can't hit it. That's not the path that you want to go. It's just learning how to do that movement and catch, so that way later down the road, when somebody like me steps in high school, I can further develop that breaking ball with like Rapsoda or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hinted at something that I think is also a really important discussion is, when you look at these studies they're not, true interventions, they're very descriptive in nature, particularly one in a short sample size, right? Is if you think about it, a curveball at age 11, if you can spin it, that's a huge competitive advantage. Like
Right.
when most kids are absolutely just terrified of the guy with a little bit of arm speed, when that kid has arm speed and then all of a sudden he can rip off a breaking ball that they have no idea is coming, like that's a
Right.
massive competitive advantage. Those are the kids that are highly likely to get completely overused by crazy young coaches. So it becomes very hard to separate out, is the curveball the problem, or is the problem that he's throwing for 3 separate teams, making 2 starts on the weekend, and then going and making another start on a Wednesday afternoon. So you have to be able to differentiate between all these potential causative factors.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm like the biggest believer in kids that age learning how to get hitters out with like just the fastball and maybe a couple of changeups, and then like practice playing catch with the breaking ball until you get older. Then you throw like maybe 2 a game when you're 12. I don't know, but at that point in like baseball development, fastballs and changeups get everybody out.
Absolutely. And I know you talk a ton about, like, it's all about late arm speed. It's all about late arm speed, right? And it's something
Yep.
we cue like crazy, whether it's learning how to like power a 2-seam or to stay on the baseball a long time with a change up or anything like that. Inherently, curveballs, they kind of take you away from late arm speed. Like at a young
Yep.
age, it's a very like delicate pitch. You're trying to manipulate the baseball more than you are to power through the baseball. Could you argue that, that's one of the biggest problems, is that people aren't actually trying to throw the baseball hard. They're trying to manipulate it.
Yes, and something that you'll see with young kids throwing breaking balls is a ton of lateral trunk tilt. So basically pulling a right-handed pitcher, pulling his head towards like first base, because they're trying to get on top of the baseball, because pitching coaches and parents are teaching them, okay, well, we want to get on top of the baseball, and their only strategy to get on top of the baseball is to go into like extreme lateral trunk tilt, which we know that exposes the elbow. But that is not inherently a curveball thing. That is a mechanical cue that the kids are doing on curveballs. So it's just important to teach them that, throwing a fastball and not going into lateral trunk tilt and actually rotating and not substituting lateral trunk tilt, you're going to get that late arm speed on a breaking ball by doing that same thing. If you go into that lateral trunk tilt and you lose separation, you have to drive early arm speed.
Exactly. And what we know about early arm speed, it increases anterior shoulder forces. It also throws a lot more stress along the medial elbow. So, as a kid basically is running away from his arm, trying to stay on top of the baseball to throw an elite breaking ball, what he effectively doing is he is putting his arm at risk. So, all these studies are done on, higher level athletes who can repeat their mechanics. That 13-year-old just trying to basically get a kid out and try to wowing, people by how he can spin it, is in many cases putting himself in a mechanically disadvantageous position to throw successfully. So, the question, kind of becomes is like, let's say, your little brother wants to learn, right? He's 10 years old, and you guys have already started spinning a little bit, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so walk me through how you started to integrate it with him, where it is now, and then where you see it going over the next 3 years.
All right. So, I mean, the first thing you got to teach is like standard grip. And I know that that's common sense, but there are kids that come in at like 15 years old that don't know how to throw a 4-seam fastball or a curveball. So, like, the first thing is teaching him a couple of different grips that he can mess around with and get comfortable with in his hand. I think it's important to have a grip that's comfortable in his hand. So, starting out like standard, like middle finger on the horseshoe. And what I like to do at first is just teaching them how to like shoot the gun to the ground. So I don't know if I can explain this over a podcast, but like shooting the gun to the ground is just teaching them how to supinate and get their hand to their partner while spinning the ball in a curveball fashion, not thinking about like doorknob slider. So we'd start like 10, literally 10 feet away from him, and he's tossing the ball to me with a shooting the gun to the ground action. And I'm wanting to see rotation, like top to bottom rotation. I don't want to see side to side like UFO spin. So that was like step number 1. Step number 2 was like then integrating, instead of like just flipping the ball from 10 feet, it was move back to like 25 feet and just add a little bit more of a normal arm action, but feel that same like shoot the gun to the ground. And then from there it's progressed back to, he's pitching at 46 feet right now. It's throw, maybe 5 or 6 2 times a week just to get the feel of spinning that breaking ball from that distance.
And when you do that, are you intent? Are you having him throw 5 or 6 in a row? Are you going fastball, breaking ball, fastball, breaking ball? You're going back to the fastball over and over again.
Yeah, I'm going back to the fastball over and over again. I don't ever, even like my college guys, I don't ever let them throw more than 2 off-speed pitches in a row in a bullpen or a practice session, because I want them feeling arm speed of the fastball. For Luke, my little brother, though, it's to feel fastball mechanics, because I don't want him altering his fastball mechanics to be able to spin a curveball. I want his brain to think that it's all coming from his wrist.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like shoot the gun to the ground, and I want him to see the rotation, the good curveball rotation to me. And then that's just the progression. Now, over the next few years, me or my dad, we don't let him throw curveballs in games, because he's learning how to throw fastballs. He's learning how to throw fastballs in, like throwing fastballs in. You can't be scared to throw fastballs in to compete at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
And he throws a pretty darn good changeup already, and he already dominates with that. So we want him to learn how to be successful with those 2 pitches before the curveball. So I would say probably, I mean, he just turned 10, so maybe next year he starts throwing a couple curveballs a game.
Yep.
Just to get the feel for it, and maybe by 12 he's throwing, I don't know, 5, 6 a game.
Mm-hmm.
But he has to earn those. He has to earn the breaking balls. If he's going out there and he's not commanding his pitches, his fastballs, and he's walking a lot of guys, then he's not going to be able to earn those breaking balls.
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to want to throw those breaking balls once we say, like, hey, you know what, let's cut it loose. But as soon as he thinks in his brain, like, oh, I can use this to get hitters out, because hitters are scared of curveballs at that age, like, he's going to have to earn those in games. And you might not even use it in the first inning. You might not use it in the second inning, because you want him to go out there and you set a goal like, hey, if you walk less than 2 guys in the first inning, in the first 2 innings, then I'll let you throw a curveball.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I love that idea. Now, here's a question. One of the upcoming guests on the podcast is Tyler Skaggs from the Angels, and Tyler's a guy who spins it at a really high level. He's got a breaking ball that's off the charts in terms of like the depth of his curveball, but he's able to shape it differently. Like he can throw it harder, softer, and really change eye level and things like that. One of the things that he talked about a lot was he was a high school quarterback, and throwing the football he felt like was an absolute game changer for his ability to actually learn how to spin the baseball at a high level and have consistent curveball mechanics. I know you love throwing the football for our more advanced guys. Our pro guys are doing it all the time, running routes at the facility. Do you see that same benefit conferred at young levels? Will you do that same thing with a 12-year-old, or is the simple size of the football something that makes it not conducive to helping?
Yeah, so I love throwing the football with anybody. But you can't throw a college or NFL-sized football with a 12-year-old. You have to have a football to where they don't have to alter their basically throwing mechanics, because they can't grip the football. So I love throwing the football. Number one, because it keeps kids athletic. But number two, like, in order to throw a spiral, you have to drive late arm speed.
Yep.
You have to. You can't drive early arm speed with a heavier implement in your hand and throw a spiral, but also feeling that like supinated position out in front and then pronating aggressively through the football in order to spin that spiral is a really good skill to learn at any age. So if a kid's coming in and I want to teach him a curveball, or he wants to learn a curveball at 12 years old, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'll take a football and play catch with him just to get him into it, like athletic, feeling that late arm speed. I might try to change something with, his thought process on mechanics or lower half. And then it's once you get the mechanics that you want to see in that late arm speed, then it's like, all right, here, grip this curveball and think whatever cue you want, put the seatbelt on or shoot the gun to the ground. But there's a lot of precursors to that. It's the football, it's the mechanics, and then it's, all right, now take that feeling of snapping your hand out in front to using this grip.
Absolutely. So I know we talked about a few mistakes, that you'll commonly see. Obviously, the lateral trunk tilt when off the mound is one of the big ones. What are some of the other mistakes that you're seeing with young pitchers as they learn, breaking balls, not just curveballs, but sliders as well?
Well, I don't think that kids 9 to 12 should learn to throw a slider at all.
I'd agree 100%.
I think they should learn how to throw a curveball if possible, because at the end of the day, like if you learn how to get to that supinated position of a curveball to be able to throw that rotate, like that top to bottom rotation or the efficient spin, as the technology people out there would say, it's so much better and so much easier at a older age to be able to teach a harder breaking ball. Now the next one would be just like lower half foundation stuff. So kids don't know how to load and unload their back hip, which puts their center of mass forward on their front side, and then the only thing they can do is spin. So throwing a breaking ball in that instance, like they're never going to be able to get to the front and front of the ball and drive late arm speed through it. They're just always going to be super rotational. They're never going to have that. You'll see like the UFO spin on those kids where, if we had like a TrackMan for like an 11-year-old kid that was doing that and he was throwing fastballs, his breaking ball arm slot would drop tremendously. And it's not necessarily that he would be dropping his arm. It's because that's the only position that his arm can go to throw that breaking ball with that kind of mechanical issue. So I would say that like the lateral trunk tilt and then like loading backside are the two biggest things that I would see at that age.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is, you mentioned TrackMan, and, certainly those are awesome, and we use Rapsodo, and they'll, give you extension and vertical and horizontal release point, but you don't need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to make sure that your 12-year-old repeats his mechanics. Like if you look at a basic iPhone with the slow motion capabilities now, like literally you can get it from multiple angles really, really easy in a matter of a few pitches. And you literally just, you can set up an overlay, or honestly, you can just look at it side by side, email a couple of videos to yourself and look at them side by side at different frames on a computer. And you can actually pick up on a ton of really, really good stuff there. So,
yeah, for sure.
So here's the next question for you. And, obviously you spoke to a little bit, like you'll teach a few different grips to kids, let them pick out whichever one is familiar to them. How much individual variance is okay at a young age? Like what do you allow slide, and what do you think is definitely no bueno?
That's a good question. So I don't think that you should have a lot of variance at a young age, to be honest. You see so many different breaking balls on TV in the big leagues every single day, but those guys are developed. Those guys know their bodies. Those guys are incredibly prepared. They have a lot of pitches underneath their belt. They have a lot of breaking balls underneath their belt. Like for a 9 to 14-year-old kid throwing a breaking ball, like you want to see like a 12 to 6, 1 to 7 break. In my opinion, you don't want to see them trying to create a ton of horizontal movement, because that's just going to make them feel rotational and feel like they, I don't know how to put it, but like you don't want to see them getting in the habit of getting rotational on breaking balls. You want to see them being like top to bottom. You want to see that good, efficient curveball spin, because at the later, when they're in high school, we can get them a slider if need be, or some sort of a harder breaking ball. But I think that first go around when they're at a young age, I think it's important to just make sure that they're thinking like almost in a tunnel instead of trying to get rotational.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing it leads to is, this is a Scherzer conversation I had, is he was very adamant, like you always have to learn one breaking ball before you learn two.
Yes.
And you see so many kids who, like 17-year-olds, shouldn't be throwing slider and curveball unless they're one of the top 5 prospects in the country. Very, very few kids that age have the feel to be able to differentiate those pitches. Most of the guys that are doing that at the professional level are guys that have a lot of advanced analytics access that can really, truly, differentiate between the two, to show that they aren't blended. Similar to like a guy who throws a slider and a cutter at age 17, like it's just not a good move.
Right.
So I think it all comes back, for your 17-year-old pitchers, obviously jumping ahead. What do you like to see? I mean, is 3 pitches really still the ideal in your mind, or you have guys that you're okay with them taking a little bit further and maybe having like a 4 and a 2 seam and then a changeup and a curveball?
Yeah. So for me, I know this is a curveball discussion, but I'm a big changeup guy. Yep. I can teach anybody on this planet how to throw a good changeup, and I think it's kind of a lost art because, like I said earlier in the podcast, like curveballs are sexy these days, and that's what gets punch outs. But teaching a guy to throw a really good changeup just makes everything else so much better. If they have that like equalizer pitch where they can throw, so I teach changeups as a power pitch. Like I want them to think of their changeup as like power slider. So that's like number one for me is if a guy can't throw a changeup, like we're gonna find a grip that's comfortable and we're gonna find that pitch where we can grip the ball and throw it just as hard as our fastball because hitters swing at arm speed. Where they're going to be able to utilize that pitch in any kind of a situation. So that's number one. Number 2 is, if they can command a 4-seam fastball, I might throw a 2-seam in their hands. Mm-hmm. But it all depends on. So there's guys out there that are 2,400 spin rate fastball kids. Like I'm just letting them throw 4-seams. I don't necessarily need to see a 2-seam out of those guys. But if they can command a 4-seam, I might throw a 2-seam in their hands, see if they can command that. They need to be able to command a arm side 2-seam first. So I think a big misconception is everybody on the planet wants to be like Corey Kluber or Greg Maddux and throw like glove side front hip sinkers to lefties right away. Mm-hmm. It's a very low percentage pitch. And when I say that is if you are getting consistent arm side run on a 2-seam fastball and you throw it glove side and miss, it's a damaged pitch. But so you have to be able to learn how to throw an arm side 2-seam first because an arm side 2-seam is going to want to go arm side. So if you miss, it's going to miss arm side. It's not a damaged pitch. So throwing high percentage pitches is where I'm getting at. So like a high percentage pitch would be a glove side 4-seam, arm side 2-seam, glove side down slider, arm side changeup. From there, once you master those things, then you can start moving on to the lower percentage pitches in my brain. So a lower percentage pitch would be like a backdoor breaking ball from a right-handed pitcher to a left-handed hitter. Yep. It's a very hard pitch to throw, and if you miss, it's damage. So I want them to master their high percentage pitches first. Then we'll move on to maybe adding another pitch if they need it. Like if you can throw a good fastball and command it, and you can command the inner half of the plate and throw a changeup, you don't even need a breaking ball. But adding a breaking ball in, obviously, you need to be able to show that you can throw a breaking ball and land it in order to get like a college scholarship, But in high school baseball, man, if you can throw inside fastballs and changeups, you'll dominate everybody.
That's where it's at. Always start with the algebra before you get to the calculus, right?
100%.
Nice.
100%.
All right, so this is awesome stuff. One of the things I did want to give everybody on the call a quick heads up about is Christian and I, along with Eric Schoenberg, a physical therapist, we run the Elite Baseball Mentorships. This is a really intensive Sunday through Tuesday. It's a 3-day educational experience that effectively combines what we do on the strength and conditioning side of things, with what Eric does on the physical therapy side of things, with what Christian does on the pitching development side of things, and really kind of puts all the pieces together in terms of how the movement competencies that we see on an evaluation relate to the exercise technique to the gym, relate with how Christian does pitch design stuff, coaches mechanics, and all that. We have our next baseball mentorship. It's an upper extremity course at our Hudson, Massachusetts location. It's June 23rd to 25th. Definitely something that I would encourage folks to check out if they are able to get up to Massachusetts and visit us for something like that. So with that said, Christian, where can folks learn more about you? I know they can check out at least elitebaseballmentorships.com if they're interested in the course, but what about you personally?
Yep. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter as CSP_pitching. And then you can send me an email if you want. If you ever have any questions, elitepitchingdevelopment@gmail.com. And then I actually have a website. One of the pro guys made it for me this year. I still haven't updated anything on it, and I think it's still like one of the blogs is like one word, but I'm currently working on getting my website up and going. So I want to start writing. So just be on the lookout for that in the coming weeks.
Very nice.
And that'll be wonderspitching.com.
Awesome. We'll throw that in the show notes so everybody can check it out, even if it is a blank website right now. This was awesome, man. Thanks for taking the time, and I'm sure you've helped out a lot of young players, coaches, and parents.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
You got it.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.